Dolmenwood. Trauma at the tomb, trauma at the table. On today's Plays the Thing. Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. Today, we continue to discuss Dolmenwood, the dark and whimsical fairy tale role-playing game written by Gavin Norman and published through his company, Necrotic Gnome. More specifically, this is the second play report for Winter's Daughter, which is a starter adventure also written by Gavin Norman for the setting. After a brief recap, this video comes to you in 3 sections. First, the play report, next, the trauma, and finally my reflections on said trauma and on what, if anything, it says about Dolmenwood as a game. But before we dive in, if you enjoy this content, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon to get notified whenever I post something new. Alright, so first that recap I promised. The last video introduced you to the characters. Those were Sandy, the fighter, Gwendy, the hunter, and her wolf brother Blaive, Nia, the bard, Mordrin, the cleric, and Cephas, the fighter. We then learned that the characters accepted a mission from the reclusive wizard Mosselmeyer Druge, who hired the party to journey to an ancient burial mound deep within the woods and retrieve a ring from the finger of Sir Chide, who laid buried there. Finding the mound, the party descended and entered a receiving chamber in the tomb where they fought 4 animated religious objects that attacked them to prevent them from violating the sanctity of the tomb. We pick up with them surveying the surroundings to determine what to do next. Before we get to that, we have to introduce a new character, as Jen joined us this time around. Her character is Brother Osbert, a friar who joined another expedition to find Sir Chide's tomb and bring back relics that might prove meaningful for the communities that he serves. Getting Osbert into the game was easy. We said that someone or something, possibly the Droon, attacked and dispersed his company during the night and that he'd been wandering in the woods for the better part of the day. Fortunately, he stumbled upon the burial mound and the sounds of combat drew him into the tomb and to the party. After some brief introductions and interactions, he decided to join the party in exploring the tomb. Directly across from the stairs that brought them into the room were double doors streaked with dampness and closed tight. Above the doors was an inscription that read, "Those most dear." In addition to all of that, there were 2 narrow passages beckoning into the tomb's depths to the left and the right of the stairs. However, the party initially focused on a new detail that had been revealed during their fight with the tomb's guardians, and that was a dust-covered mosaic that was now visible due to their feet kind of scuffing on the floor during the fight. This art piece depicted a figure they assumed was Sir Chide, riding into battle on a white steed, piercing the heart of a frost elf with his spear. Sandy got bored after the party briefly discussed the mosaic and abruptly opened the double doors, revealing a crypt with 5 coffers lining the walls to the left and to the right. A faint green glow emanated from a sheet of slime that stretched across half the chamber and dripped down from a hairline crack in the ceiling into a fissure on the crypt floor. And the whole chamber was kind of illuminated with a surreal light that came from the slime. However, the most alarming thing was that there was 2 skeletons that floated in the air, waltzing around the room to some unheard tune. The party could make out another set of double doors behind the skeletons. Initially, the party braced for a fight, but it didn't come, so they began interacting with the skeletons and with the crypt. Mike told me that Nia would shut her eyes and concentrate on trying to hear the music to which the skeletons danced. The adventure doesn't provide any guidance on this. However, I decided that Nia would have a shot at succeeding due to the implication that she's fey-touched as a consequence of her time in the woods. Mike made his roll, so I told him that Nia could hear a pretty yet haunting waltz filling the chamber. Then, Osbert, Mordrin, and Nia began to speak with the skeletons. The skeletons remembered little of their former lives, but when questioned, they did identify themselves as Lady Amaranda and Lord Brigforthwith, the father and mother of Sir Chide. Superficial chit-chat aside, the skeletons seemed intent on dancing away the burden of their unlife, and they bid their characters join them in their eternal waltz. Meanwhile, Sandy, Gwendy, and Cephas moved into the chamber, past the ghostly figures, and towards the double doors at the end. They were very careful to avoid the sheet of slime and the fissure. They were very careful not to disturb the various tombs. And they got to the doors, and Sandy opened them to reveal a 15-foot wide and 30-foot long chamber. Columns lined the center of the chamber, and narrow corridors ran east and west. Yet another set of double doors was at the other end, and that set of double doors was flanked by 2 massive stone hounds on chain leashes. Above the door was the inscription, "Call to the Champions." Seeing this, Cephas decided to remain in the crypt where the other characters were distracting the skeletons, while Sandy and Gwendy went into the chamber and approached the hounds. And this is when trauma struck. In his characteristically impulsive fashion, Sandy walked between the 2 hounds and moved to push the twin doors open. The moment he touched the doors, the hounds came to life and attacked. I won't go through the blow by blow here, but suffice to say that Sandy initially got lucky. He dodged and took only minor damage from one of the hounds landing a blow. And realizing that the hounds outmatched him, Sandy bolted for the nearest corridor with the hounds snapping at his heels. It was close, but he managed to escape by making it to the eastern corridor. However, Gwendy didn't realize that he'd made it to safety. In a desperate move, she pulled a dog whistle from her pouch and blew it, hoping to draw the hounds away. Unfortunately, they were much faster than she expected, and one of them managed to catch up to her, lunge, and tear into her arm, shredding her red cloak as she scrambled into the western corridor. Cephas took that opportunity to sprint across the room and join Sandy in the eastern corridor. So now we have the group kind of split up. By this point, the rest of the party had clustered near the double doors that led into this hall of hounds. That's when Mike, playing Nia, asked if Nia might know anything about the creatures. I had him roll her lore score, and she succeeded, so I told him that she knew that these were magical guardians, best not engaged in combat, and usually deactivated through words or riddles. Nia called out to the others, telling them that this was the case, and then boldly, she took a step into the room and spoke the words, "Stand down, companions of Sir Chide," or something like that. The hounds turned towards her, growling with threat and anger, and I asked Mike if Nia was going to remain standing in the room. He thought for a moment and he said, "Sure, they're on leashes, they can't reach me." Unfortunately, the leashes extended as the hounds lunged towards her, and everything came down to an initiative roll. Nia lost, and the hounds caught her and mauled her to death before she could step out. This moment hit really hard. I could see it in Mike's face. He was just kind of in the dumps. It hit me hard too. I liked Nia a lot. I loved how Mike played her, and I truly appreciated his thoughtful and careful choices throughout the game. She wasn't reckless, not that it's bad to be reckless, but she was trying to figure out how to solve the situation in some non-combat-y way, and she was close to succeeding. And yet, one small tactical decision cost her everything. We all felt it, but play continued for at least a moment in a kind of a disorganized way. As GM, I felt bombarded by many things happening at once. Players started flipping through the death rules to see if they could save Nia in some way. Mike sat back, processing, kind of mourning his character and contemplating whether he even wanted to make a new character for this night. I suggested that he could. Lauren, still in character as Mordrin, turned desperately to the skeletons. She was like, "Tell us how to get past the hounds. Is there anything in there that could save her?" But the skeletons just kept waltzing and weren't of much help. And then, in the midst of all of this, Mario spoke up, announcing that Sandy got a dispassionate look in his face and strode out of the tomb. Without another word, Mario said, "Good night, guys," and he left the Zoom. For me, that was the trauma at the table. Before I go on, let me share that I checked in with Mario eventually, and he said he was cool with continuing the game and to continuing to play Sandy. He said that he was just tired that night and figured that it made sense for Sandy to walk away due to the shock that he felt because he thought it was kind of his fault that Nia had died. All of that's cool, but that night, his walking out of the Zoom felt like a protest. It felt like a rejection of the play experience, and it sat with me for days, if not weeks. However, those who remained decided to continue to play while Mike contemplated a new character. I told him his new character could be another Brother Osbert Expedition survivor, so we can get him in pretty quickly, but he ended up not making a new character that night, even though he stayed for the rest of the game. Looking back, I probably should have called it at that point. I was rattled by what had happened, which impeded my ability to listen and respond to player actions as well as I normally do, and unfortunately that might have been responsible for even more trauma, for yet another loss. Let me explain how. After Nia's death and Sandy's departure, Gwendy, Mordrin, Cephas, and Osbert decided to search for clues about the hounds' names in the tomb. They found such a clue down the eastern passage in a room that contained rows of statues holding weapons and a faded mural on its eastern wall. The mural depicted Sir Chide on horseback, wielding a sword that glowed white as he charged a frost elf army flanked by his hounds. Upon cleaning the mural, the party noticed the name Cheddar depicted in one of the hound's collars. As they left the chamber, Mordrin also noticed that one of the statues held the sword that was depicted in the mural. She took it and it started to glow white, but she immediately discarded it when she recognized it as fairy blade. It's a no-no for clerics of the Pluraltine Church to be wielding fairy blades. Gwendy took it instead. After that, the party took the southern exit from the statue room, and they entered a circular chamber that contained a full-length mirror that stood before an empty plinth. There was a narrow passage cut to the east of the chamber, which the characters figured out went towards the receiving chamber where they had first entered the tomb. And then across from the mirror, there was a set of descending stairs cut diagonally into the barrow mound. Unfortunately, Mordrin decided to inspect the mirror and gazed into it, failed her saving throw, and became paralyzed. Unable to figure out how to free her from the paralysis, Cephas ended up carrying Mordrin as they continued to explore the tomb. Thus burdened, Gwendy, Osbert, and Cephas hurried through the western passage out of that circular chamber, moved across the receiving chamber that passage dumped them into, and moved into another circular chamber that featured a northern corridor and a northeastward descending staircase, much like the one in the other chamber. This room, however, contained a blindfolded statue of a fair maiden with a finger pointed to her lips, and she faced those descending stairs. This time, Gwendy and Blythe descended those stairs to see what was down there, and they found a large pool of water in which candles floated. And in the center of the pool, there was like a small island, really a plinth coming out of that water. And on that plinth stood another statue of a beautiful maiden with a star on her brow. Gwendy came back up the stairs and reported what she discovered, but the party decided to take the northerly passage from the circular chamber to complete kind of investigating that level of the tomb. When they went that way, they found a chapel to Saint Sedge of the Pluraltine Church. The chapel contained broken pews, an altar with a statue of Saint Sedge on it that held an unlit red candle, and a ragged tapestry on the western wall. Gwendy lit the candle, which conjured a gust of wind and distant sounds of horses and men in combat. The adventure as written doesn't mean for this ghostly wind to be anything more than an atmospheric detail. However, Dan had Gwendy do something really neat here. Gwendy closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of combat, hoping to hear Sir Chai direct his hounds by name in combat. I should have given Dan an ability check or some other chance to determine Gwendy's success, but I failed to honor this move due to my rattled state, and I regretted not doing so immediately, especially given what happened next. The characters noticed the wind conjured by the candle blowing the chapel's ragged tapestry aside, revealing a door behind. The heroes bash the door open to find a priest's quarters now inhabited by 3 worm tongues that had burrowed into the mound from the outside. The creatures lunge at the party with their acidic maws, and while the heroes manage to defeat them, Blythe, Gwendy's wolf brother, fell to the monsters. After the battle, things became even more desperate. Gwendy scooped up Blythe, ran out of the chamber, and descended the stairs to the pool of candles, laying her brother at its edge, hoping that the waters would in some way restore the wolf. They did not. Osbert followed Gwendy with some concern while Cephas searched the priest's quarters. Fortunately, Cephas's efforts paid off as he found a book that featured a poem about Sir Chide and his favored hounds, and there they were able to get the name of the second hound, Flager. He also found some treasures, including a box of 20 holy wafers. Later, Osbert was able to determine that the wafers had healing properties, but by that point it was too late to use them for Blythe, as Gwendy had picked up Blythe's body and walked into the candlelit pool, and when she got closer to the statue in the middle, she vanished into thin air. And that's where we chose to end it for the night. So, if it isn't evident already, I felt terrible after this session. It's not that I'm unaccustomed to characters dying in my games. I play Shadowdark after all, and we've lost several characters throughout our Gloaming campaign. Players just understand that it's part of the experience, and something about the way that game is pitched, something about the way that it looks on the page communicates as much. I've also had characters die in many other games, including Dungeons & Dragons 5e and more recently in Dungeons & Dragons 2024. But this time it felt downright awful. Why? Part of it undoubtedly has to do with how I processed Mario's abrupt exit. I take him at his word that he was simply tired and that it made sense for his character to leave in that way, but that's not how it felt when it happened. It felt like a revolt. It felt like a rejection of the play experience. It felt like I had done something wrong. Even though later on he said that that's not the case, in the moment, that's what I was experiencing. So what would have happened if Mario had stayed? The death would still have hit hard, but would it have hit as hard? I don't know, because that's not what happened. What did happen is that I was left questioning a lot of things. First, I questioned myself, my skill as a game master, whether or not I had made some sort of mistake in terms of running the game, whether my approach was just problematic in some way. I will always kind of consider those things. It's part, perhaps, of being a self-reflective game master. The other thing the session left me with was questioning whether Dolmenwood as a game system is suited to the play experience that my players imagined from the game's art and setting materials. They glommed onto the setting's whimsy, which, to be honest, really came through in most of what the characters encountered in Winter's Daughter as written. But when combat happened, I think they experienced it as far more of a meat grinder than they had imagined for this game. So those are all the ideas that I had bouncing around in my mind the night of the game, the day after, for the next week, for a couple of weeks. I really sat with this for a while. I initially thought, wow, this didn't feel good. Maybe I should just back away and not GM the next session and just let Dolmenwood be forgotten by our group and just move on with playing all the other things that we're playing. But that's no good. If I'm at fault for what happened at the table, I need to sort of work on that in some way. And if there is some disconnect between what Dolmenwood offers as a setting, or at least what my players thought that Dolmenwood offered as a setting, and the actual game system, then that's also something that I can work on. So I decided that I would indeed schedule the next session, make some adjustments and make some tweaks to try to make this a more pleasurable game experience. But in doing that, I wanted to make sure that I didn't rob the game of meaningful consequences for player actions. And that's the big question. Did I strike that balance when I ran the next session? That, my friends, is the subject of the next video. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this discussion, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next installment. As always, I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, and I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.